All right, I think I have cleared the waiting room for now, and we'll add in people as they come in. All right, well, hi everyone. Welcome to the St. Charles Center for Faith Plus Action Learning webinar for March. The topic is Never Again is Now, Learning from LGBTQ plus History to Fight for Our Future. I'm so glad you're here and grateful you chose to spend your lunch break with us. I'm Paige Davis, the Executive Director here at the St. Charles Center for Faith Plus Action in New Orleans. At the center, we create spaces for people of all faiths to learn, unlearn, and act, building a community grounded in equity and empathy. Learning webinars are just one way that we create a space to stay curious, connected, and grounded in challenging times. Today, I'm honored to welcome historian and friend, Dr. Jake Newsome. Dr. Newsome is an award-winning scholar of German and American LGBTQ plus history and the founder and president of the Pink Triangle Legacies Project, which honors the Nazis LGBTQ plus victims and combats homophobia and transphobia through education and advocacy. He is the author of Pink Triangle Legacies, Coming Out in the Shadow of the Holocaust, tracing the Pink Triangle's transformation into a global symbol of pride. Jake has been featured in outlets like The Washington Post and in popular podcasts like Getting Curious with Jonathan Van Ness, where I first discovered his work. He has been invited by the French, UK, and US governments to speak on LGBTQ plus history's urgent lessons for today. Dr. Newsome, thank you so much for being with us today. We're excited to learn from you. And to everyone joining, feel free to eat, relax, keep your camera off or on as you prefer, and please just keep yourselves on mute if you haven't already. This will be recorded, and we may have time for a little Q&A at the end. We'll have to see how it goes, okay? All right, Jake, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Paige. As Paige mentioned, we met kind of through the internet, social media, and podcasts. Um, and then after we started chatting, we realized we actually had grown up very not too far from each other. So it's a really small world, but it's great to get to work together now in this capacity. As Paige said, my name is Dr. Jake Newsome. My pronouns are he, him, and I am joining y'all from sunny San Diego. So it's a lunch and learn for y'all. It's kind of a breakfast and learn, I guess, for me. Um, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. While I'm getting that pulled up, let us know in the chat where y'all are logging on from, so we can see what our shared space looks like today. All right, that should be loading. Can you see that page? Perfect. Okay. All right, so let's take a look in the chat. This is always my favorite part. All right, we've got from DC, from England. Oh, that's pretty cool. Houston, New Orleans, LA, Tampa, New York State, Toronto. So we actually have a nice international, global community here this afternoon slash morning slash evening, depending on where we all are. But either way, I'm really glad to share this space with all of you. The Pink Triangle Legacies Project is really glad and honored to be able to partner with the St. Charles Center for Faith Plus Action to bring you this presentation. Now, a few notes. After the Holocaust ended, the world promised never again, right? They said that never again would we let something like that happen. But of course, despite that promise, multiple genocides have been waged against targeted communities across the world since the Holocaust ended. Um, if we collectively are to try to take that promise or that challenge of never again seriously and to make it a reality, we have to acknowledge that it can't only apply to large-scale mass murder, like the final solution of the Holocaust, because history shows us again and again and again that genocide doesn't begin with murder. Right? It begins with words. It begins with ideas. It begins with communities slowly allowing violence and discrimination to become normalized over time. So for us to collectively make never again a reality, we need to understand and then heed history's lessons so that we can identify the warning signs and fight back against the forces of authoritarianism and state violence. Now, all of us are on the call, no matter where we are from in the world. We are here together at a particularly vital time for the LGBTQ communities across the world. We are witnessing an alarming rise and wave in anti-LGBTQ legislation. So, for example, here in the United States, there were 616 anti-LGBTQ bills that were proposed at the local, state, and federal levels last year alone, right? Just in 2025, that's over two bills per day, or almost two bills per day, every day for a year. Now, the rhetoric that politicians are using against queer and trans communities is dangerous, right? It's not just discriminatory, it's violent and it's dangerous. And the history of the Holocaust shows us how dangerous words and political rhetoric can be, right? Especially when those words are then turned into law. So this is not the first time that people in positions of authority and influence have used the structures of power to oppress LGBTQ folks. So together today, we're going to look at one historical example that very clearly demonstrates the dangers of queerphobia and transphobia becoming enshrined into law. We'll also see how much of the anti-LGBTQ rhetoric that we are witnessing today echoes that was used by the Nazis in Germany. Now, our team of experts at the Pink Triangle Legacies Project have identified 10 key lessons that will help you better understand, on the one hand, the history of the Nazi persecution of LGBTQ folks, but it will also provide vital context for understanding what we're facing today. And then after that, I'll share 7 key takeaways that can help you turn the lessons of history into action. So first, let's dive into the history. And we're going to start off with the first historical lesson, which is that progress is fragile and it needs to be constantly defended. Now, in the 30 years before the Nazis came to power, queer and trans Germans had built the most visible and dynamic LGBTQ community in the world up until that point. There was a vast network of LGBTQ publications. So whether you were interested in politics or art or sports, you could find a queer magazine or a newspaper or a pamphlet for you. And we know that there was a combined readership of about 1 million people reading these LGBTQ publications. In Berlin, the capital city alone, there were over 100 different nightclubs, political organizations, restaurants, cafes, and businesses that catered exclusively or explicitly to the LGBTQ community. The Berlin was also home to the very first LGBTQ rights organization in the world. It was led by the Jewish socialist and gay physician, Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld. In 1919, he founded the Institute for Sexual Science, which was among other things, a pioneer in transgender advocacy and healthcare specifically. Hirschfeld and his institute even worked with the Berlin Police Department to issue gender-affirming IDs to trans people to help shield them from discriminatory laws. And then the Nazis were elected to power. Right? They became the largest political party in Germany in 1932. And then in January of 1933, Hitler, as the party's leader, was appointed Chancellor of Germany. And within literally a matter of weeks, the Nazi organization was able to drive these vibrant queer and trans communities back underground. And then they initiated the most violent attack on LGBTQ folks in modern history. So again, the lesson is that progress is fragile. right? It can always be destroyed or taken away, and it requires both a commitment and action to be defended. Our second lesson is that homophobia and transphobia have long been political tools of extremist movements. History shows us that anti-LGBTQ rhetoric in politics often frames LGBTQ communities as a fad or a fade, or as something that is new. Conservative politicians often point to the LGBTQ community as evidence of alleged moral decline, especially during times of social change. So that means we often see verbal attacks on queer and trans people being framed as trying to quote, take back the country or trying to restore traditional values. That was the case in Germany too. Right? In the 1920s and the early 1930s, when Germany was still a democracy, there were multiple conservative parties, and each of them had different stances on the economy, geopolitics, and cultural issues. But the Nazi Party, which began as really this small fringe right-wing party, was politically savvy. And they revved up their homophobic rhetoric because they knew that doing so would, yes, rile up their base, but it would also unify factions in the right wing in a way that other issues simply wouldn't. In other words, they knew that maybe some conservative voters didn't agree with everything in the Nazi Party platform, but they knew that fanning the flames of homophobia could convince these voters to kind of hold their nose and vote for the Nazis in a way that other issues didn't. So they spewed their hatred against queer and trans people at the same time as they fanned the flames of hatred against Jews, foreigners, and others that they considered to be racial enemies or enemies of the state. So tapping into homophobia and transphobia was a very strategic move on the Nazis' part to shore up support among conservative and religious voters, again, who might not have agreed with other components of Nazism. The third lesson is that today's anti-LGBTQ stereotypes are dangerously similar to the ways that Nazis talked about queer and trans people. Now, some of the arguments that the Nazis made against LGBTQ folks were unique to that time and place, for sure, right? So, for example, much of Nazi ideology was based on the international eugenics movement, and the Nazis believed that they could create a so-called master race through better breeding, right? So, understanding and then controlling human sexuality, specifically who could have sex with whom, was a central part of the Nazi regime, right? Sex was the key to literally reproducing this so-called master race. Um, and so that was a key component or a key focus of the Nazi regime. In October of 1936, Heinrich Himmler established the Reich Central Office for Combating Homosexuality and Abortion. And you can just tell, even from the name of that organization, that clearly LGBTQ and reproductive issues were tied together. The alleged threat that homosexuality posed was to the German birth rate, allegedly by stealing the future offspring of Nazi children from the fatherland. So while those talking points were unique to Germany in the 1930s, in other aspects, the Nazis' anti-LGBTQ rhetoric is similar to the ways that conservatives in other times and places talk about the queer community. So, for example, Nazi leadership did not believe that people were born queer or trans. They believed that it was a lifestyle choice and that people could be cured or re-educated and be forced to give up their lifestyle through violence if necessary. So it was this belief that it was something that could ultimately tempt anybody or everybody into this lifestyle that made it so dangerous, according to the Nazis. They were essentially afraid of more and more people being converted or tempted into being gay or trans. In 1927, 6 years before Hitler was appointed chancellor, Wilhelm Frick, who was a Nazi politician, declared on the floor of the parliament that unnatural fornication between men must be prosecuted with all severity, because if it was left unchecked, this vice will lead to the downfall of the German nation. Now, for The main talking point that the Nazis fell back onto time and time again was that queer people, especially what they called homosexual men, um, were pedophiles and that they were trying to seduce Germany's youth into the homosexual lifestyle. They said it across the radio waves, they published it in newspapers and in other forms of propaganda. And in 1937, the SS newspaper ran a front page article declaring that the threat of homosexuals to Germany's young people, especially to young boys, was so high that the party deemed them to be, quote, enemies of the state. So the fourth lesson is that politicians often use vague and broad terminology to defend or hide their anti-LGBTQ legislation. Once the Nazis gained power in 1933, they immediately began turning their anti-LGBTQ rhetoric into anti-LGBTQ policies. But they mostly used vague or broad names for their legislation in an attempt to build more support and hide their true intentions. So, for example, within weeks of Hitler's appointment as chancellor, the party passed policies that forcibly shut down, quote, establishments that promote immorality. Of course, that meant that they closed the network of LGBTQ meeting spaces, bars, community centers, and organizations. The Nazis also knew how important it was to control people's access to information and how to shape the public narrative. So while they were spreading homophobic propaganda, they also took away the ability for LGBTQ folks to defend and advocate for themselves. So upon coming to power, they immediately banned all of those LGBTQ publications that we talked about a few slides ago. And in May of 1933, a group of college students and Nazi stormtroopers looted the library of the Institute for Sexual Science, which was that LGBTQ organization that we talked about just a moment ago. The students burned over 20,000 books, unique artifacts, and research materials in the infamous book burnings in Berlin. So the content of the world's first queer archive went up in smoke, destroying the records of our history. Now, the biggest weapon that the Nazis had in their arsenal was a law called Paragraph 175. And this law criminalized so-called unnatural fornication between men, and it had existed since the creation of Germany as a country in 1871. But in 1935, the Nazi lawyers amended this law by broadening it. And the new wording criminalized just indecency between men. And this definition of that term indecency was left vague so that judges and prosecutors could interpret that how they wanted to on a case-by-case basis and convict as many men as possible. As a result of this amendment, the numbers and arrests of men under the law skyrocketed. It rose by actually 743%. So now after this amendment, it was easier for anyone to accuse someone of homosexuality and know that the regime would react to that accusation, whether it was true or not. And that leads me to the next key lesson, which was that the Nazis' violence against LGBTQ folks was wildly popular among ordinary Germans. So this was not just a top-down persecution that was led solely by the government. The majority of the German population did nothing to question or resist the Nazis' violence against LGBTQ folks, but there was a significant portion of the citizenry who went further by actively participating in the persecution of queer and trans people. We know, or these ordinary people knew, that their voice could activate the power and the violence of the regime against people that they denounced. And so the records, the archives show us that ordinary people turned in queer and trans people into the Nazis in truly staggering numbers. Denunciations by neighbors, co-workers, landlords, strangers, and even in some cases their own family members played a defining role in the Nazi regime's ability to identify and locate and then arrest LGBTQ people. The number of denunciations of queer people rose so dramatically that some newspapers actually had to urge their readers not to overburden the police departments until the police could get caught up going after the people that had been turned in. Now, the sixth point, and to me, this one is really important. Like today, queer and trans people didn't just accept everything that the regime did to them without fighting back in different ways. One group of lesbian friends in Berlin actually even established a fake rowing club to give themselves an alibi for why they continued to meet along the shore of the river in Berlin. Others resisted in more forceful ways. Frida Belinfante was a musician in the Netherlands who also lived semi-openly as a lesbian. She joined an underground resistance movement that was led by a gay artist named Willem Arendeus. And together, their group forged tens of thousands of fake identification documents to help hide Jews from the Nazis. They even bombed the Amsterdam Population Registry Office in March of 1943 so that the Nazis couldn't compare the forged ID documents against the originals that had been kept on file there in the office. Frida escaped and survived, but Willem was caught and executed rather. In his final words to his lawyer, he asked his lawyer to please let the world know that homosexuals are not cowards. So the seventh key lesson is that appeasement is never a viable option for stopping fascism, especially if you're LGBTQ. So we know, right, that LGBTQ folks are diverse. They hold a wide range of political and social beliefs. Unfortunately, that also means that some are racist or find authoritarian movements appealing. That was true even in 1930s Germany when some gay men joined the Nazi Party because they believed in Nazi ideals. Now, the Nazi leadership kept those individuals around while they were useful, but eventually purged them from the party and sent them to the concentration camps as well. So let's take a look at the case of Friedrich Rotzowait as an example of the dangers of appeasement. He was a gay pioneer in Germany. He built a publishing empire that produced many of those magazines that I mentioned earlier. He founded an organization called the League of Human Rights, and it had over 10,000 members in the 1920s. He used his position and his wealth to advocate against anti-gay laws in Germany. But as the Nazi Party grew, Friedrich asserted that he wanted to remain, quote, non-political. This was probably to try to protect his business interests. And he told his readers that the Nazis' homophobic rhetoric was just campaign promises to get votes, and that the Nazis would only the Nazis would not go after, quote, respectable gays. That in fact they would only go after the other gays like Jews. Friedrich spent the latter part of his life and the pinnacle of his publishing career appealing to the growing fascist party. He hoped that throwing the, quote, less reputable gays under the bus would gain him favor with the leaders of the far-right movement, but he was wrong. Friedrich died of tuberculosis in 1932, so he didn't live to see the Nazis immediately and completely dismantle his LGBTQ publishing empire and destroy his life's work as soon as they came to power. Friedrich Rotzoweit's story demonstrates that appeasement is never a viable strategy for halting the rise of authoritarianism. And it also teaches us that the social acceptance of some members of the LGBTQ community should never be bought at the expense of the safety of others. The eighth key point is that authoritarians target groups differently, but at the same time. Resistance also has to be intersectional and bring together coalitions. Now, as the Nazis sought to establish their so-called master race, they targeted several groups as enemies. And although they would have never used the term, their persecution was intersectional. Resistance to fascism also has to be intersectional. And although our organization, the Pink Triangle Legacies Project, focuses on the legacy of the Pink Triangle, we can't forget that the Pink Triangle was only one of many. So the fight against queerphobia and transphobia also has to be the fight against anti-Semitism and racism and ableism and other forms of dehumanization and marginalization. As we show up to defend queer and trans people, we also have to show up to defend immigrants and communities of color and all of the other communities that are being targeted uh, by fascist movements. In this face of a strategy of divide and conquer, solidarity is our greatest strength. The ninth lesson is that the Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers. It started with words. It started when stereotypes were left to go unchecked. It started when politicians turned those words into policies and then enshrined them into laws that slowly stripped away people's rights for nearly 10 years before the mass murders ever began. We're left to ponder for ourselves, how far are we willing to let words go today? And the last lesson that we will leave you with is that democracy does not inherently protect LGBTQ rights. Democracy collapsed in Germany in 1933 when people voted the Nazis into power. The Allies defeated Nazi Germany in May of 1945, and most queer and trans Germans hoped that the end of the war would also mean the end of their persecution, but they were wrong. The American military upheld the Nazi version of paragraph 175 and even re-imprisoned gay concentration camp survivors during the occupation period. When West Germany was created in 1949, right, this was America's democratic ally. They also chose to uphold and use the Nazi version of the anti-gay law. This democratic government used a fascist law to arrest 100,000 queer men. Paragraph 175 was finally amended in 1969, but not fully repealed until 1994. In the 1940s and 1950s, the US launched a massive attack on LGBTQ Americans. So, for example, they purged thousands of gay people from the federal government. And after the hard-fought victories in the wake of Stonewall, LGBTQ Americans faced backlash during the Reagan years and the AIDS crisis. Up to this very day, the queer and trans community, but especially the trans community, they have won some important victories, like marriage equality, more protections under the law. And yet this progress has sparked incredible backlash over the past decade. German history, but also US history, shows us how democracies have also systematically persecuted queer and trans people. So if we want a government that protects the right of marginalized communities, we have to fight for it and we have to actively build it. Now, history shows us how far queer and transphobia have gone in the past, but it does not have to be like that, right? It's up to us to decide how far we let it go today. So to help equip us for the fight against queerphobia and transphobia and the rise of authoritarianism, I'm now going to share with you 7 steps that you can use to take action today. As I've said, in the last 10 years, we've seen an alarming rise in the number of anti-LGBTQ laws across the United States. 2022 set the record for the most number of anti-LGBTQ bills that were proposed in the US. That record was broken in 2023, again in 2024, and then again in 2025. Last year, especially, we witnessed a blitz of executive orders that systematically dismantle programs that promote equal opportunities for racial and ethnic minorities, women, people with disabilities, and LGBTQ folks. There's also been a systematic erasure of information about queer and trans issues from websites and agencies across the federal government. While the rights of the broader LGBTQ community are under attack, it's trans people that are being targeted specifically. Executive orders now regulate transgender people's bodily autonomy by dictating where they can go, what bathrooms they can use, and what sports they can play. Also by blocking access to medical care and banning them from military service. All of this can feel and is overwhelming, right? Because we as individuals cannot stop executive orders. But we've identified some action steps that you can take today, and some are specific to the LGBTQ community, and others are steps that our allies can and should take as well. So the first tip is to keep yourself informed. With the vast amount of disinformation out there, especially relating to queer and trans issues, that it's more important now than ever to remain informed through trusted sources that uplift queer and trans perspectives and expertise. So here are some sources of widely respected outlets that are committed to ensuring accurate information and inclusive representation. Queer News Daily. I just want to point out, if you would rather get your information on social media rather than reading on a web page, Queer News Daily is on Instagram, and their account is at Queer News Daily, and they're really great there to keep you informed on your social media feed. The second is to keep yourself safe. The Pink Triangle Legacies Project has put together a resource with safety tips for LGBTQ folks in the US today. It provides detailed information about protecting your physical and your mental well-being, but I want to highlight a couple of those today. The first is to be strategic about your visibility, right? There's a lot of emphasis on LGBTQ folks to be out and proud. And that's certainly important, right? I wish we lived in a world where that being out never caused any problems, and of course that's not the case. So if you do not, or if you are not, feel safe being fully out or not at all, that's perfectly fine, right? That doesn't make you any less part of the community. It doesn't make you any less queer or trans. There are other ways that you can express yourself and live your authentic life safely. Throughout history, LGBTQ folks have used symbols to connect and to communicate with other members of the community. And so that's also the case today. You also want to know your rights, regardless of your citizenship status. So executive orders and new policies are being announced at a dizzying speed, but organizations like Lambda Legal have free resources on their website to help you remain informed of your rights and also how to get legal representation when your rights have been violated. The third thing is to celebrate normal joys and remind yourself what you're fighting for, right? Sometimes it may feel like it today, but simply surviving is not or should not be the ultimate goal for LGBTQ liberation, right? We must also be able to not just survive, but to thrive. We are working towards a world in which LGBTQ folks get to experience the joys of life without fear. So don't feel guilty about hanging out with friends and loved ones or just having fun sometimes, because these moments of joy sustain us and they remind us what we are fighting for. I want to play just a really brief clip. It's 60 seconds long of a lesbian Jewish Holocaust survivor named Margot Heumann talking about the importance of love and joy. Let's see if it'll load.
Life different, yeah. We used to pretend that we were in different places, what we'll do when we get out. Fantasize about it. And share things. And care for each other. We left Auschwitz together too. I don't know. It's something being together with Dita and we did together. Now we realize now, we talk about it because I see her and we meet at least once a year. Either I go to Toronto or she comes here. Neither one of us would have survived without the other. And we both realize that. Because we gave each other hope and support and love and friendship. And I think that's what makes life worth living.
So Margot met and fell in love with another Jewish teenage girl while they were living in the Theresienstadt ghetto. They survived seven different concentration camps together, including Auschwitz. Right? They survived until liberation. And as you just saw, Margot credits her relationship, her love for Dita, and Dita's love for her as the reason that they survived. So don't forget that queer love is powerful, y'all. Also, you should lean into your community and join forces with other people. In challenging times like these, it's important to identify your community and know that you're not alone. Whether it's biological family, your chosen family, or close friends, surrounding yourself with people can help you remain resilient and positive about the future that you're fighting for. Part of joining forces is actively supporting the work of organizations who are fighting the fight, especially local or regional organizations. And that's really one of the points that's important for allies. So I've added a few organizations here on the screen that are based out of New Orleans or Louisiana, kind of, or the South more generally. And I just want to say that support can look different, right? It can mean donating. It could be financial support. And believe me, as federal funding is being cut and drying up, local, financial support to these local organizations is more important than ever. But if you don't have the financial means to donate, you can also donate your time and effort, right? You can volunteer. You can call these organizations and ask them what they need. Because believe me, as the president of a small nonprofit, we would love to hear those types of phone calls. We will gladly tell you what you could do to help us in our work. Authoritarian movements often employ a strategy of divide and conquer, and we really have to resist that. We have to join forces, right? And again, just as a reminder, some folks might feel like, what can I do to stop this? I don't know how to fight this. And the good thing is you don't have to as an individual. You don't have to know, because you know what? There are teams, there are organizations of experts who know exactly what they're doing, who are doing the good work. They just need our support. So sometimes the best way to contribute is just to support the experts who are doing the work. The fifth thing is, I hope folks don't roll their eyes when they hear about this, because we hear it all the time, is you need to register to vote and then actually go do the voting, right? And again, this is not just for presidential or midterms elections. As we are seeing year after year, your local and state elections are more important than ever, especially your local school boards. So just some statistics for you. 1 in 10 millennials and almost 1 in 3 members of Gen Z identify as LGBTQ. Together, we have the potential to play a critical role in the future of US elections. There are a number of different organizations to help you make the most out of your electoral power. I've just put one example up here. It's a new organization called Outvote. They are a partner of the Pink Triangle Legacies Project. They have a number of different sources. You can view their website, including funding, scholarships, and funding for projects to help you turn and tap into and activate your civic power as a voter. The sixth point is making your voice heard, and research clearly shows that going on record by contacting your elected officials does have measurable impact on their stance on issues. It might not feel like it, right? Because one call might not change everything, but collective pressure does. The data shows that. Your representatives do keep track of what their constituents care about, and maybe not because the elected official himself personally cares about it, but because it impacts their reelection chances, right? It impacts their policy priorities and their political leverage. So every call that you make is logged, and when enough people reach out on the same issue, it signals urgency. Now, calling your elected official might seem daunting, especially if you're an introvert like me, but there are resources like 5calls.org that provide scripts, depending on the policy that you're most interested in, as well as the numbers of your local officials, so they make it as easy as possible. So take advantage and use resources like this. Now, I want to say this. There is no such thing as a silent ally. So if you are not actively involved in standing up for the rights and protections of marginalized groups, then you're not really an ally. And that goes for LGBTQ folks too, right? Being a part of a marginalized group does not exempt you from actively defending the rights of other marginalized people. Every cisgender gay person should be defending our trans siblings. We should be defending immigrants and communities of color from ICE. When I say use your voice, I do mean, yes, use your literal voice, but also it could be ways of signaling your support in other ways, right? Your profile picture, a yard sign, your pronouns in an email signature. These are all signals to those who are affected that they're not alone, right? But it's also a signal to the people who are doing the discrimination about what your values are and that their acts of discrimination are not okay around you. So in the face of hatred, our action or inaction, right, or silence will be interpreted as acceptance. So don't allow friends to make hateful jokes or comments around you, because allowing a small racist or homophobic or transphobic comment or joke to fly increases the chances of letting a more significant malicious comment incident to pass later on. And just remember that the Nazis didn't need all Germans to be true believers and supporters of their cause, right? They just needed enough Germans to look away or do nothing. So today, let's commit to not looking away, right? Let's commit to getting in the way. As John Lewis said, let's make some good trouble. And the last point that I will make, and then I'd love to pause for questions, is practicing mindfulness can prepare you to make a decision in a time of stress. It is difficult to evaluate our morals and make important decisions when we are faced with challenges in that moment. All of the research and data shows that. History also shows us that when the situation comes, most people, even good people, are overwhelmed and they make the wrong choice or they make no choice at all. So set yourself up for success, right? It's importantly that we regularly do a self-evaluation and understand what our values are and where our lines in the sand are, right? What are we willing to accept? What will we say or do when we witness something? And literally script it out. I keep a note on my phone that I read once a week to make sure that it's almost like muscle memory of what I might say or do if I witness something happening in real life, because I also know myself. I'm a analyzer. And so if I see something, my mind automatically goes to, wait, let me see if this is really what I think it is. Let me see it from a different perspective. Even though my moral compass knows what I'm watching, my brain wants to take time to analyze it. So script it out and prepare yourself. Just like we need to practice when we play a sport or a musical instrument, being an upstander also requires practice. If we've practiced beforehand, we'll be more prepared to act how we want to when it's time to make that decision in real life. All right, so that is the wrap up of my presentation. So I'd like to pause here to take any questions that you might have. And first of all, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see everybody better.
Thank you, Jake. That was really, really great and encouraging. And I really appreciated the resources at the end too. We have a question in the chat real quick. And then Catherine Julian, I see you jump up here. We'll catch you next, okay? Anna Foster said, what does the general population doing nothing look like? Does it look like the way our general population in the US is acting now? The No Kings protests are pretty large, but they don't feel effective sometimes. I wonder if at the time of the Holocaust, most people were acting the same way, lightly protesting, feeling uncomfortable, but not accomplishing a ton.
That's a really great question. It's a great observation, and I think it really gets at the heart of the work that we do. And I say we, meaning, all of us in our different capacities, because sometimes we do see different forms of what we imagine protest to be, right? The really huge crowds of people all across the country protesting on No King's Day, um, and yet we still see authoritarianism marching forward. And so it can feel really overwhelming. And like, well, if that's not stopping us, then if that's not stopping it, what is? And I would say to that, is are mass protests the most effective way at stopping systematic change or systematic executive orders or policies or new laws? No. Are they still important? Yes. Right? Because we have to continue to voice our opposition, to form community, to show people that there is resistance out there, that they are not alone in feeling that they are against what the government is doing. But clearly, this is a all hands on deck, multiple pronged approach to fight fascism, because fascism is also not just one thing, right? It's not just laws. It is laws, it is media, it is culture, right? It is fascism and authoritarianism is multi-pronged. The resistance to it also has to be, faced on a multi-front um, battlefield. I sometimes I don't like using the violent terms of like
Yeah.
war and defense, but it is right. So while people are out there protesting, we have to fund places like Legal Lambda Legal that are fighting the legal battles. Right. We have to vote and put in uh, elected officials from the school board all the way up to the White House that support democracy. So I hope that answers your question. To your point, and I see Catherine. There's other Holocaust historians on the call as well. There were people that voiced dissent in the Nazi regime. Um, I think one of the most profound things that I've taken away from studying Holocaust history is that at some point it's too late, right? Resistance is more effective earlier on.
Mhm.
When when governments have less centralized authority, um, we can't wait until like, oh, now this is affecting me directly. I should probably figure out what I'm going to do. Because sometimes at some point, as alarmist as it sounds, there is a too late. um, and I think we don't want to find out in retrospect where that moment was. We can't wait to find out. So, this is, like I said, it's an all hands on deck situation where we've got to, whatever our part to play is, whatever you're comfortable doing, whatever you're able to do, we should be doing that right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it looks different for everyone, but maybe we all do a little bit of everything and then we find the lane that works for us and go that direction.
Absolutely.
I want to give you a chance.
Well, yeah. Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jake. This was so wonderful. I mean, this is like inspirational. It's really powerful to see how history can really be implemented right now, and like that we draw on these lessons. This is absolutely how it should be taught. We know it always isn't taught like this, but yeah, so important, this work you're doing. And thanks y'all for hosting, Jake. This was such a wonderful and very timely talk. So I'm thinking about that coalition building piece. And I'm joined by my colleague Thornton Muncher, and we work in interfaith spaces. So I'm going to kind of think about that because St. Charles Center for Faith and Action does a lot of this too. And I often think about myself as a queer person within communities of faith, like within my community of faith, how I can, push back and educate people there. But I'm also wondering, how can faith groups best advocate on behalf of the queer community right now? And how can we try to coalition build is like in interfaith spaces as well? What would that look like? And especially because, the faith communities, a lot of faith communities haven't always been kind to queer folks, and there's a lot of trauma there too. So yeah, how do we navigate that right now when we all need to kind of join together?
I'm gonna have just one comment, and then I want to hear what Paige has to say, because also like this, and Paige and I have had this conversation on DMs and texts for a while. But to me, the biggest thing is visibility and visible public support, taking a stance publicly, because I grew up in Southern Baptist, Sunday church in South Georgia, right? And so I think that we it's not just a stereotype, right? But there is a real history of like we equate religion as anti-LGBTQ. And so for me, when I grew up and found out that there were some churches that were actually like pro-LGBTQ, it kind of blew my mind, and I was like, I don't really believe it. I'm not going to pay attention to that. But I also remember I live right, like literally, you know, one block over from my house is a Methodist church, and on January 20th, 2025, they put up a rainbow flag. Like it was not a waiting, let's wait until something happens. It was like we know that what this administration's stance on LGBTQ people are, and we're going to let our stance be known. And they have not taken down that rainbow flag since then. This was not a Pride month. Like let's just, you know, be show some support for a month. Like they put it up on January 20th and has not come down. Um, and I'll just say that that has meant a lot to me personally. And now I think Paige probably has something way more sophisticated to say than that.
No, no, I mean, really on the advocacy side where churches can show their support, you nailed it. I mean, being loud, showing that, preaching it on Sunday mornings or whatever day of worship that a church may have, or synagogue, or wherever you're at may have, you know, we are actually based in a church, and there's rainbow stickers everywhere. They do a drag show fundraiser for PFLAG, so it's very visible to the community that this church is an ally for queer people looking for a safe space. I think that's how it's done. When it comes to interfaith work and partnering with other churches, faiths, organizations of faith, I think you just do it. You make it happen. We have someone on this call, Lee Rochelle, who has done a fantastic job of doing that here in Louisiana, of gathering a lot of different faith groups together. And that's the goal of the center as well, is to gather different faith groups to have these hard conversations. And look, a lot of times you're not always going to land on the same place. You know, you're not going to have the same perspectives. But that's the really beautiful part of it, is doing it anyways and continuing to do the work, because otherwise, how are we going to get anywhere if people of faith, you know, can't have these conversations together? So yeah, and Catherine, we'll have to connect more because I want to hear more about what you're doing. Samantha, did you have a question as well?
I do, but Dr. Newsome, it looks like you were about to say something, so please go ahead. No? Okay. Well, hi everyone. Thanks so much for this event. It's really, really interesting. My name is Samantha. I work on these issues on the international level, sort of mainstreaming LGBTQI plus inclusion in democracy strengthening, and then also, you know, with an interreligious lens as well, where possible, where that work is possible. I actually have a more history-focused question, if that's all right. Um, Dr. Newsome, you brought up the example of Pierre from Alsace, the little Alsatian city of Mulhouse. And it brought up an interesting question for me, which is that, you know, you had earlier in your presentation talked about how, you know, for the Nazis in their ideology, persecuting people on the basis of sexuality was at its core like a racist motive because of the eugenics movement of the time period. Can you talk a little bit about how the Nazis applied this principle as they began to occupy other countries, not only where there was a German-speaking population and hence, you know, sort of their reason for expanding to bring all German-speaking peoples into one unified government, but you know, for example, like Piazzi was a French man, right? But of German descent, but was culturally French. Like I remember his family was not in the city of Mulhouse, not as connected to the Alsatian community, right? So yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for the question and for your work, Samantha. Before I answer that question, I will just, as a good historian, always say like, yes, and and let me, you know, it's more complicated. So yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, Nazi homophobia, I mean, they racialized homophobia, just like they racialized anti-Semitism, because eugenics was at the heart of what their worldview. But certainly racial ideology was not the only thing that their homophobia and transphobia was tied to. I mean, it was also about gender, you know, their understandings of gender, and you know, because they also believed that, I mean, if you looked at the writing of some Nazis, they weren't necessarily even cared about. They didn't necessarily care as much about like the threat to the birth rate as they cared about, well, supposedly it made men weak and effeminate, and that means they would give up their natural leadership roles because that was a masculine thing, and they said it made women, too masculine, and therefore they wouldn't be good nurturing mothers to the next generation of children, and so like there certainly was like absolutely gender tied into there. There was, I mean, it was race, but at least on paper, official policy, they went after queer folks because they were a threat to the birth rate. Um, so just wanted to always add like a little bit of like nuance there. But to your question about how this interplay with their geopolitics is really interesting, because when the Nazis, they only brought paragraph 175, their anti-gay law, with them in certain territories that they occupied. And that was mostly in Western and Northern European places, because they believed that those Western and Northern European places were racially, with the Aryan Germans, racially superior. Like that, maybe not as at the pinnacle as Germanic Aryan master race people, but that as Western and Northern Europeans, that they were fundamentally a superior race. And so they brought paragraph 175 with them in those territories as a way to try to protect these larger pools of superior races. When they started expanding east, though, into Poland, Czechoslovakia, like elsewhere, they didn't bring paragraph 175 with them, because in their mind, those peoples were inferior and therefore didn't need protection. Like they were going to be subjugated anyway. And so a lot of the Germans, the Nazi officials said, like, well, they're inferior, so of course they're going to indulge more in decency. So like, why even try to police it? And I mean, there is still more, like, there's new research being done on the campaign against homosexuality in annexed territories. But the preliminary research shows that when they did use paragraph 175 in places like, back what was then Czechoslovakia, it was when like a Czech man had sex with a German man, right? So like when they had sex with a German soldier, so like when there was this kind of perceived direct threat to a German, is when they enforced it. But thanks so much for that question.
All right, we can probably take one more question if anyone else has a question.
And if not, I will share. Oh, I see Scott came off mute. So go ahead, Scott.
Oh, hey, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking, yeah, I'm learning so much. Thank you so much for this talk. Super interested in your book and looking forward to reading it. Um, my question was, how has rhetoric about how have anti-gay opponents used rhetoric about child protection then and now?
I mean, it's almost like copy and paste.
Yeah.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
honestly, like we can argue about the specific semantics of one generation to the next, but it at its core, it is the same argument that queer people by nature are predatory, and that they're going to go after your children. They're going to, they're pedophiles. I mean, when I started reading what the Nazis were writing about and posting in newspapers and stuff, it literally had to stop and pinch myself of like, did I accidentally open up a newspaper from, Florida in the 2020s? Because yes, today the terminology is groomer, right? There were, queer and trans people are grooming kids, but in Nazi Germany, it was they're seducing them into the homosexual lifestyle. So it's again this idea, and it's a propaganda tactic, right? They're not saying, they didn't say we're going after you. You don't have a right to exist and express your identity. It was framed in this rhetoric of protection, that we as the government need to protect children, right? Your children are under attack, and you need to give us authority to protect them. And of course, like, what parent is going to say like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to protect my children." So they know that playing on that rhetoric of protection is going to get some people either to cross the aisle, so to speak, and like get on board with them, or at least not do anything to stop them. because who wants to be the one who's opposing protection of children?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Well, thank y'all so much. And Jake, thank you so, so much. I see you've got the community guide up here on the screen, so I hope everyone can pull out their phone quickly and scan this. Pink Triangle Legacies Project has so many tools and resources on their website. It's just incredible. I'll be sending a follow-up link shortly with a quick survey about today, but also linking you to the Pink Triangle Legacies Project website so that you can stay informed with what they have going on. Jake, again, appreciate you so much. And thank you everyone who attended today. Stay plugged in with us. We've got more programming coming up that you all might be interested in. Y'all have a great afternoon.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.